Crimson Flicker by Julia Huney. A Crimson Empire prequel. Copyright 2023. Audio copyright 2024 by Julia Huney. All rights reserved. When Antonin Marconi entered headquarters strategic command of the Federation Space Force, cold dread trickled down his spine. Walking into the enemy's den carrying only a comtab and sack lunch terrified him more than anything. Except maybe facing his grandmother. But Lou was light years away, and StratCom was here, now. He crossed the wide marble floor, passing between the tall columns and stone walls hung with long blue and silver banners. Coming to a stop in front of a high desk at the back of the room, he presented his identification to the young corporal seated behind the banks of monitors. "Hi, I'm the new guy." "Well, new guy. I'm starting work today." And the kid, he might be 21, which seemed positively juvenile to his own 28, pointed at a glass plate set in the desk without looking away from his screens. "Scan your ID." Tony placed his comtab face down on the dark square and waited. The system beeped, and the corporal turned his head a few degrees to view another screen. "Anthony Bergen?" His dark eyes finally flicked to Tony's lighter brown ones. Tony nodded. "Call me Tony. That's above my pay grade. I'll call you sir." The corporal pointed to the 3 stripes on his sleeve. "I'm not an officer." Tony slid the comtab back in his pocket. "Civilian equivalent. Not worth my job to call you Tony. If we meet at the club later, maybe. Handprint." He tapped the dark glass again. Tony placed his palm on the reader and watched the light glow around it, his heart beating fast. If his cover wasn't airtight, this is when it would get blown. He'd passed the background checks and security clearances, but that's because Tony Bergen was based on a real person. The trickiest part, or so the data jockeys back home told him, was connecting the modified background to a real agent. If they'd failed to make that connection correctly. "You're cleared to enter, sir. Personnel is the second door on the right." The corporal handed him a card on a lanyard, his watchful eyes snapping back to the monitors. "Wear this. They'll trade it in for a real one once you've completed the onboarding. Welcome to StratCom." "Thanks. What's your name?" Tony slung the woven cord over his head, the electronic card getting caught on his tie. Why did the feds insist on wearing these archaic things? He smothered a snort. Both the card and the necktie were archaic by Commonwealth standards. "Corporal Ivan Standish. You can call me Stand. Have a good day, sir." The young man stressed the last word, as if to remind Tony of the gap between their ranks. "Thanks, Stand. You too." He smoothed his brown hair as he stepped into the open wedge of the rotating door. He looked back before the dark glass closed behind him. Data scrolled across one of Stan's screen. The other 3 showed animated videos. Tony let a grin flicker across his lips. So much for Stan's impressive attention to duty. The door whomped softly as the rubberized edge of the rotating glass hit the inside of the cylindrical entry. A yellow-toned light illuminated the small space. His footsteps were muffled by the beige carpet, or maybe the pressure in his ears. The internal opening slid into view, and his ears popped in response. Inside, the impressive entry was just a memory. A long, boring hallway stretched before him, the unadorned tan walls and bland beige carpet seeming to go on forever. A hushed murmur, more of a hum than distinguishable voices, filtered from the open door farther down. Tony found the one marked personnel and went inside. 3 hours later, Tony paused in an open doorway, exhausted from the monotony of in-processing. The experience hadn't been substantially different from his first hours at the Academy in the Commonwealth, or his initial duty station on Navon. Bureaucracy was the same all over the galaxy. Unlike the personnel offices, communications sported a window. An adventurous beam of sunshine warmed a spot on the dingy carpet, dust dancing in the light. A rank of metal filing cabinets filled the right side of the room, and a single chair, its thin, sandy cushion stained by something unidentifiable, stood on the left. A woman with wavy brown hair smoothed back into a long tail hunched over a battered desk under the window. Tony tapped on the door jamb and stepped inside. "Sergeant Mata?" The woman looked up, then squared her shoulders, drawing his attention to the 2 silver bars on her collar. "No, she's out right now. Can I help you?" "Sorry, Lieutenant, I didn't see your rank." She pointed at the nameplate on the desk with a shrug. I'm at her desk. And I'm sure they told you to look for the woman. There aren't many of us. He crossed the small room, hand outstretched. Tony Bergen. They told me Sergeant Mata could get my comms sorted. The woman stood to shake his hand. She was tall, an inch or two taller than Tony's perfectly average height, with golden brown eyes and a sprinkle of freckles across her nose. Quinn Templeton. I'm pretty new here too, but I think I can get you set up. This way. She led him through an open door beyond the filing cabinets into a long room. High benches lined the walls, and a row of shelves crammed with electronics ran down the middle. She took him to the far end and pointed at another stained beige chair. Have a seat. Her lips quirked when he paused. Don't worry, it's ugly, but nothing is going to get on your pants. I had them cleaned when I got here last month. Ugly, but perfectly safe. Tony sat with a chuckle. I thought StratCom would be a glitzy showplace. Quinn activated the console and pulled a stool up in front of it. You'd think. I'm told the right side is. The right side? Are we on the wrong side? Yes and no. I don't know if you noticed when you came in, but there are 2 doors behind the security desk. We normal people enter through the left. The VIPs have a swankier entrance on the right. I know someone in public affairs. I haven't been over there yet. But I'm told the inside fits the image you'd expect from a headquarters. Give me your comm tab. She extended her hand, palm up. ID active. Tony swiped the device open and pulled up his identification screen. As she took it, he noted the heavy gold band on her finger. Married. Just his luck. All the friendly ones were already taken. Not that he wanted to get involved with a Federation woman. That would complicate his mission in the extreme. But it would be nice to have a friend. And according to his mission briefings, married Federation women didn't fraternize with single men. Lieutenant Templeton took the device and placed it on a scan plate, much like the one at the front desk, except this one appeared to be portable. Her console pinged, and she scrolled through the data that appeared on the screen, clicking here and there, muttering to herself as she worked. Almost got it. Where are you from? She barely glanced at him as she asked the question. Despite her obviously casual interest, the air caught in Tony's chest. This was his first undercover mission, and he'd memorized his fictional background forward and backward. He knew his supposed siblings, and their spouses and children's names. He knew the make of vehicle his faux mother drove. He could recite a history of family details including birthdays, graduation dates, favorite colors, even most cherished possessions. Why could he suddenly not remember where Tony Bergen grew up? He cleared his throat to give himself a few extra seconds, but the dry air caught and launched him into a coughing fit. Quinn eyed him with alarm as he waved off her concern. After watching a few painful moments of hacking, she disappeared, then returned carrying a bottle of water. Tony gulped the liquid, narrowly avoiding drowning himself when his throat spasmed mid-swallow, and finally wiped his eyes. Sorry. Allergies, I guess. I came here from Systems Command. She gave him a long, puzzled look, then went back to the data screens. I didn't think it was that hard a question. It was idle chit-chat, not an inquisition, although your file confirms that. She tapped the screen with a chuckle, then turned to face him. But I meant, where did you grow up? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Lunesco. Her eyes widened. Wow, that's fringe. I'm from Tavertine. I've only been out in the fringes once. So far. I expect we'll get stationed there soon enough. Everyone has to do their stint, right? I'm hoping growing up there gives me credit for time served. Tony nodded at the comm tab. I have to meet my new boss in a few. Do I leave that with you, or? Sorry, no, I didn't realize you were in a hurry. She tapped a few more keys and clicked another button. That should do you. It will take about 2 hours to fully populate the databases, but you should be able to log into your comms right away. She lifted the device but paused before handing it to him. My contact info is in there. Standard procedure in case you have any problems. She blushed as she hurriedly added the addendum. Thanks. Maybe we can meet up later? He raised a brow and gave a sheepish grin. Sorry, I'm not trying to hit on you. I just thought it might be nice to have another newbie to compare notes with. She flushed again but smiled. Yeah, that would be great. Reggie's been here before, but he forgets. I don't know anyone. I've heard a lot of the junior officers meet at the club after work on Wednesday. Why don't you stop by? You can grab a beer, and we can both meet some new people. Tony slid the comm tab into his pocket and stood. It's a date. Well, not a date, but I'll see you then. He bumbled his way out of the office, hoping he didn't lay it on too thick. Friendly, cheerful, and socially awkward. That was his cover personality. It was close enough to his real character to maintain for the duration of the assignment. And he expected to be here a long time.
Quinn watched Tony hurry out of the room. He seemed to be anxious to make sure she understood he wasn't interested in a romantic relationship, which was perfect. She was married with a toddler. But the speed at which he'd made his lack of intentions clear was a little depressing. Quinn and Reggie had been married only 3 years, but already the luster was wearing off the relationship. She'd hoped having a child would help bring them closer, but Reggie's job seemed to get in the way more often than not. As a public affairs officer, he spent a lot of time away from the base, working with senior officers, the media, and local contractors. He also traveled regularly to Romara City, the Federation's capital, to consult with PA officers closer to the seat of government. She thought the move to StratCom would keep him local, but his absences had increased, not decreased. His boss and office mates didn't seem to travel as much, which made her think he might be volunteering for the temporary duty assignments. He showed little interest in Lucas, their son, and less interest in her since the boy's birth. All of it was depressing. For some reason, she'd taken an immediate liking to Tony Bergen. Unlike so many of her military peers, he was friendly without being condescending. His cheerful demeanor countered Reggie's disinterest, and the feelings of incompetence due to the new job. Imposter syndrome reared its ugly head at each new assignment. But Tony had treated her like an equal, an attitude sorely lacking in the Federation's mostly male officer corps. She could use a little more of that in her life. Quinn walked into the officers' club, following behind the 2 ensigns from the comm squadron. They were both junior to her but patronized her at every opportunity. Their boss didn't seem to care. In fact, he had made extremely clear his displeasure in having another female under his command. Dean and Kirchhoff had followed the boss's lead, giving her the most uncomfortable chair, the most decrepit desk, and leaving only the boring tasks for her. When they reached the club, she ordered a beer. Dean's brows went up. I thought nursing mothers weren't supposed to drink. Quinn stepped closer, using her height to loom over the short man. She'd weaned her son almost a year ago, not that it was any of his business. Maybe you shouldn't. Shouldn't what? He turned to flash his ComTab at the bar register, using the movement to step away. Drink? I didn't have a baby. Think. You don't appear to be very good at it. She raised her brows, exactly as he had. Kirchhoff brayed, his harsh laughter making heads turn toward them, and slapped his companion on the back. She got you. Good one, Templeton. She eyed the hand he lifted but declined to give him the high five he clearly expected. Kirchhoff's hand dropped, and a nasty expression slid across his face, then disappeared. Great job, Quinn. Pass up the chance to get one of them on your side. Of course it wouldn't last, so why bother? Attempting to mollify him, she extended her fist, and he bumped it reluctantly. Gentlemen, I have people to speak with. Thanks for the beer. She took the beverage Dean had just picked up and sipped it. Ignoring his sputtering and Kirchhoff's renewed laughter, she strode away from the bar. Nicely done. Tony appeared at her side as she crossed the room. Who are those Krepiks? Quinn stopped. Krepik. Are you from Hadriana? No. Tony stopped, too, shaking his head. Never been there. Why? She hitched a defensive shoulder. That word, I usually associate it with Hadriana. My husband is from there. Tony lifted both hands. Sorry, no. I've traveled a lot. Pick up swear words from everywhere. Quinn got the impression he could read more in her expression than she might like. She blanked her face. Something she'd learned to do early in her academy years and had perfected since. Ensigns Kirchhoff and Dean work in my squadron. Ensigns? Tony's gaze flicked to her rank, then to the men by the bar. I guess they missed the lesson on respecting your seniors. Quinn smiled tightly. That doesn't seem to apply to women, but enough of them. How are you settling in? Tony launched into a story about his new coworker and her extreme love of tiny ceramic animals. The entire cubicle is absolutely littered with them. And don't even think about moving any. I bumped the shelf on my side and she just about popped a gasket. He did an imitation of the apoplectic woman protecting her decorations that had Quinn in stitches. What's so funny? A heavy arm dropped across Quinn's shoulders. It should have been comforting, but felt more like a trap. Quinn's laughter died as she turned to the tall, handsome man at her side. Reggie, this is Tony Bergen. Tony, this is my husband, Reggie Lorraine. Hey. Reggie's blue eyes flicked over Tony, measuring and dismissing, then returned to his wife. Quinn, aren't you supposed to pick up the kid? He took her beer and drained half the bottle. You were going to get him today. She yanked her comtab from her pocket. Reggie shook his head, his hand clamping her tightly against his side, giving her a rough little shake. No, that's next week. Today is your turn. You and your memory. He gave Tony a knowing look. Postpartum amnesia. Tony frowned. Postpartum? I thought your son was a toddler. Reggie laughed again. Yeah, he's almost 2. I guess it's long-term amnesia. That doesn't even make sense. Quinn pulled away from his arm and opened her calendar. She waved the screen at Reggie. See. It says you're picking up. Reggie's hand closed over hers, pushing the device away. You must have put it on the wrong day. And they close in 20 minutes, so you'd better get going. He downed the rest of her beer. I'd go, but he grinned and raised the empty container. Quinn gritted her teeth, then blanked her face again and turned to Tony. Sorry, I guess you're on your own. Enjoy your evening. She twisted out of range as Reggie leaned in to kiss her. See you at home. She glanced back as she reached the door. Reggie had already struck up a conversation with another officer. Tony had moved to the shadows at the edge of the room. Their eyes met for a moment, then she hurried away.
Tony's footsteps grated in the gravel of the running trail inside the perimeter of the base. A 4-meter-wide track of red cinder flanked the shimmering force shield on either side, providing a clear view of the land outside the facility and a convenient exercise path. Early sunlight glinted on the cameras mounted atop the 3-meter-high posts, watching both sides of the boundary. Tony pretended he didn't notice the surveillance, keeping his jog at a steady pace. Sweat rolled down his face, but the sea breeze cooled him, fresh and enjoyable despite the faint tang of fish. Scoping out the base's defenses wasn't part of his job. He was a deep cover asset, and he'd be embedded in the Federation for years, decades even. His only responsibility now was to settle into the job and become a good little Federation drone, drawing no attention, raising no red flags. But he liked to know the logistics of his duty location. So every day for the last 2 weeks he'd run the fence line, noting possible weaknesses. As he rounded the last corner, returning to his starting point, a moan caught his attention. Hello? He stopped, breathing deeply, trying to slow his pounding heart. Hello? No one was visible along the wide corridor of the fence line. He followed the side path through the low scrub toward the closest building. Another moan took him around a small shed. In the narrow space between the shed and the nearest building he found a young man, dirty and bloody. So much for staying under the radar. What happened to you? The young man's eyes blinked open, and he groaned again. I don't... He rolled to his side and vomited, narrowly missing Tony's expensive running shoes. Anything broken? Can you feel your fingers and toes? Tony brushed a finger across the man's knuckles, then grasped an ankle. The man, a boy really, waved his hands and feet. Yeah, I can move. He slowly raised a hand to the back of his head. But my brain hurts. His fingers came away bloody. What's your name? Tony reached for his comm tab but didn't pull it out. He really shouldn't get involved. Adrian Tenlos. Do you know where you are? Tenlos struggled to sit up, so Tony helped him. The boy groaned again, then leaned against the shed, his blood smearing across the dirty siding. Am I still on base? He closed his eyes. Yes, you belong here, then? The kid nodded, then clasped a hand to his head again. I'm from the academy. It's a summer program, supposed to help me learn about active duty. They didn't cover this in the briefings. What's this? What happened? Tenlos's lips clamped shut. Tony sighed. Great. The kid got into something he shouldn't have, which Tony definitely couldn't be involved with. I can call the command center. They'll send out paramedics. You got a comm tab? Tenlos rolled his head from side to side against the shed. No, don't call. I can't get in trouble again. Tony sat back on his heels. You need medical care. How will that get you in trouble? I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing. Drinking? Tony had heard the academy had strict rules about alcohol. Ha, I don't drink. And if that was enough to get you kicked out, I'd be the only one left. Tenlos winced and pushed himself a little farther up the wall. No, his eyes popped open. Who did you say you are? My name is Tony. I work in finance. I'm not going to rat you out to anyone. Can you help me get back to the visiting officer's quarters? I have a room there. The boy pulled his feet toward his rear end, preparing to stand. I do too. Haven't found an apartment yet. Tony grabbed his arm to help him rise. I haven't seen you around. Tenlos's eyes closed again. It's early, isn't it? Like stupid early? Tony chuckled. It's about 6:30. That's why you never see me. I'm a night owl. I probably get home while you're out here jogging. Tony smirked at the boy's attempt to sound worldly. Were you on your way home when this happened? Tony waved a hand at Tenlos's face and body. Yes and no. I took a detour to help a coworker. He started pushing himself up the side of the building. Tony helped him up, then slung the kid's arm over his shoulder. He didn't think a cadet should stay up all night when he was working, but what did he know? The Federation was probably very different from the Commonwealth. Or maybe that's why he thought he'd get into trouble. And someone didn't like you helping this coworker? I guess not. Tenlos stumbled a little, his weight falling on Tony's shoulders. You won't tell Ensign Dion, will you? Dion? Is that your boss? As they moved slowly down the path toward the parking lot, Tony tried to figure out where he knew that name. It wasn't anyone in finance. He's my mentor. The word came out harsh and sarcastic. In the comm squadron. Tony snapped his fingers. Comm. He's that Krepik who works with Quinn. Quinn? You mean Lieutenant Templeton? You know her? The kid's voice cracked. We've met a few times. Let's get you back to your room and cleaned up. Good thing it's a Saturday. You don't have to work today, do you? Tenlos sighed. No, but we have a trip to Romara City. Lieutenant Templeton is chaperoning us. Well, maybe you can make it, although I think you should go to the clinic instead. They reached Tony's little car, and he helped the kid lean against the passenger side. Hang on, I don't want any blood on my upholstery. He stripped off his sweaty t-shirt and slid it over the headrest. Not ideal, but it should keep the seat clean, and more importantly, evidence-free. Helping a cadet who got beat up shouldn't be enough to get him on anyone's radar, but better safe than sorry. Tenlos settled into the seat. Thanks. Let me get my first aid kit. Tony popped the trunk and pulled out the small, black bag. It was well stocked by Federation standards, but without the high-tech equipment standard in the Commonwealth. He cleaned the blood from Tenlos's head and neck. This doesn't look too bad. But you'll want to get checked for concussion. I'm not a medic, but you don't seem to have most of the symptoms. Except the headache, and the barfing, and the whole losing consciousness thing. A hint of a chuckle lightened Tenlos's tone. Were you actually out? Tony smoothed the bandage over the gash at the base of Tenlos's skull. I'm not sure, maybe. Do you know who did this to you? Tony snapped the med kit closed and stuffed the bloody swab inside its wrapper. I can't really say. Can't? Or won't? Tenlos didn't answer. Tony detoured through the coffee shop drive-thru on the way back to the VOQ and ordered enough food for a squadron of cadets and a black coffee for himself. Tenlos wolfed down 3 egg sandwiches between gulps of coffee, with enough cream and sugar to qualify as a dessert. He clearly wasn't experiencing any more nausea. It was almost 7 when they pulled into the VOQ parking lot, and Quinn was waiting.
Quinn's heart did a tiny happy stutter when she recognized Tony Bergen climbing out of the boring, beige sedan. The instant connection she'd felt when they met came back stronger every time. Somehow she knew he would be a loyal, long-term friend. She hadn't seen him since the aborted meeting at the club a week and a half ago, but it felt like yesterday. "Tony, what are you doing here? And why are you half naked?" Quinn hadn't expected him to be the kind of guy who showed off his body, but she had to admit she didn't mind the view. But it was kind of chilly this morning. She wrapped her cardigan more tightly around herself. Tony glanced down at his shirtless torso and black running shorts. "I was running. And I live here. New guy, remember? They haven't transferred me to permanent housing yet." He waved at the tall apartment buildings beyond the shorter visiting officer quarters, while the younger enlisted folks lived in barracks on the far side of the base. These buildings housed enlisted members with families, plus officers and civilian employees, except for high-ranking leaders who lived in the big houses on Admiral's Row. As he approached, Quinn noticed the kid getting out of the passenger seat, Cadet Tenlos. The boy limped slightly, favoring his left leg. He wore drain-pipe jeans with torn-out knees tucked into leather boots with multiple buckles and chunky, 10-centimeter heels. His silky green shirt looked more appropriate to a nightclub than a day of sightseeing, but it was wrinkled and dirty. Quinn took a couple steps and reached toward his shoulder. "Adrian, is that blood?" Tenlos flinched back. "It's nothing. You're kinda early. I need to grab a shower before we go." She seized his arm as he passed. "You didn't answer my question, Cadet." She stressed the title. The ensigns in her office might think they could get away with insubordination, but she wasn't taking it from a kid from the academy. He flushed. "Sorry, sir." He glanced at Tony. Quinn's gaze darted between the two men. She was certain Tony had nothing to do with the injuries, except perhaps patching them up. Does he need a med pod? Tony eyed the cadet and lifted a shoulder. It would be a good idea, but he's worried about reporting. Tenlos shot a death glare at Tony. "I told you." The older man lifted a hand. "Lieutenant Templeton isn't going to tell Dean." The name made Quinn's back stiffen. She crossed her arms. "It's not my job to keep the ensign in the loop on anything. If he can't keep tabs on his cadet, that's on him. Come on." "There's a med pod in the athletic center." She jerked her head at the van behind her. "Get in." "But it will report my injuries to my supervisor, won't it?" Tenlos hung back. "What was the kid hiding? It will enter data into your medical record, but I can override the reporting, since I outranked Ian, even if he refused to acknowledge that fact. Besides, technically all the cadets are assigned to me for reporting purposes." The male officers hadn't wanted to deal with the paperwork. She'd insisted the ensigns help with the mentoring, but that was as far as she'd been able to push. Tenlos's shoulders relaxed, and he headed for the passenger side of the van. Quinn waited until he had his seatbelt fastened to add, "But I expect to hear the full story in return." "No, I can't." Quinn glared at the cadet, then turned to point at Tony. "Don't think you're getting off so easy, Bergen. Get in the car. I want to hear both sides." Tony's lips twitched, but he went to the passenger side of the vehicle. "Yes, Mom." "What's ma'am mean?" Did he go a little pale? Odd. It's a term they use in the Krimson Empire, or so I heard. Female equivalent of sir, although I'm not sure why you need both. Huh. I'm shocked they don't use it here. Any reason to discriminate? She climbed in, then reached into the back seat to snag a hoodie. And put some clothes on, she threw it across the seat at him. Tony caught the pink sweatshirt and pulled it on, zipping it halfway up his chest. He popped a hip and fluffed his short hair while fluttering his eyelashes. "I think the color really brings out my eyes, don't you?" Quinn rolled her eyes, trying to hide a laugh. "Get in the car, princess." Tony climbed in back and fastened his seatbelt. "Isn't the athletic center right over there?" He pointed. "Tenlos can walk that far." Quinn shook her head. "It's still early, but there's no reason to draw attention. That shirt, even without the blood," she broke off, pointing at Tenlos and giving a dramatic shudder. "Hey, this is a Porvus original." "Exactly. No one is going to wear that thing to the gym at 7 in the morning. In fact, Quinn glanced in the rearview mirror before turning onto the road. Maybe you should give that sweatshirt to Adrian, Tony. Tenlos looked at Tony, then raised both hands. No way. I'm not wearing a pink sweatshirt. And are those flowers? No. He threw a quick look at Quinn. Sir. Quinn rolled her eyes, then nodded in agreement. I'm pretty sure you couldn't pull it off like Tony. But there should be one of Reggie's in the back. I'll grab it when we stop. She parked near the end of one of the large apartment buildings. The gym stood across a wide swathe of grass, with a paved path between the two buildings. A couple of men jogged toward the structure, their shirts dark with sweat, but nothing else moved. Quinn opened the rear of the van and tossed Reggie's wrinkled and sweaty jacket over the seat back to Tony. The two men got out of the vehicle, Tenlos adjusting the much too large garment to cover his designer gear. They hurried to the side entrance of the gym, and Quinn used her comm tab to release the door lock. She held it open. On the left, a boxy blue star on a white circle marked the third door. Again, Quinn used the comm tab to open the door, revealing a white-tiled room with two long, low pods. Before Tenlos could open the closer one, she put a hand on the lid. First, I want to know what happened. Tenlos froze for a second, then sank onto the bench between the two pods, groaning. I didn't do anything wrong. You don't sound too sure about that. Quinn leaned against the pod, crossing her arms. I can't get kicked out of the academy. Tony sat beside the kid and put a hand on his shoulder. If you didn't do anything wrong, we'll make sure that doesn't happen. Quinn gave him a murder look. She couldn't promise that. There were some things the system wouldn't forgive, no matter the circumstances. Tony lifted a hand and shook his head. She shrugged, waving for him to proceed. Tenlos lifted his head and sat back, closing his eyes as he leaned against the wall. I went to a party last night. Ensign Dian was there. He asked me to drop something off for him on my way back to the VOQ. I couldn't exactly say no. He's my boss. He's not your boss. He's your mentor. He's supposed to help you, not set you up. Tenlos opened his eyes, and he nodded slightly, then shrugged. I waited for his friend. Next thing I know, I'm laying on the ground and the sun is coming up. Then he found me. He jerked his head at Tony. Quinn straightened up, her mind spinning. What did he give you? Tenlos threw his hands wide, almost hitting Tony. I dunno. It was in an envelope. About this big. He held his hands about 30 centimeters apart. Tony swiveled on the bench to face the cadet, his eyes narrow. An envelope? Thin, like sheets of paper? Or lumpy? Lumpy? Are you not sure? No, I'm sure it was lumpy, but not sure what you think lumpy is. Tony sighed. How was it lumpy? Like memory chips? Money? A bag of dirt? Kind of like a bag of dirt. It was shifty. He rubbed his fingers. And Dean gave it to you at a party? Quinn asked. Outside. He said he had to go home, and could I swing by his car and take it for him? I said, sure. I mean, he's an officer, so doing a favor for him is smart, right? Tenlos's gaze traveled from Quinn to Tony and back, clearly seeking reassurance. Depends on the favor. This one sounds shifty all the way around. But I can see why you didn't say no. Quinn stood and opened the med pod. You didn't see who hit you? The boy shrugged and stood. They were behind me. It could have been the guy I was supposed to give the envelope to, but I don't know why he hit me. Or maybe it was someone stealing the whatever, but I don't want to get into trouble with Ensign Dian. Don't worry, I'll take care of Dian. Quinn suppressed a grin as she patted the open med pod. Tap your comm tab against the control panel so it can access your medical data. Technically, you're a civilian, so it won't report your trauma to your chain of command. I'm not a civilian, I'm a cadet. He protested, but he pressed his device against the control panel. Quinn rocked a hand back and forth. The rules are different for cadets. If you have permanent damage, it will be reported to the academy. Yes, I know that would be bad, but I don't think it's the case. And let's face it, if you have that kind of damage, you need to know. Besides, it will report to me, not Dian. Tenlos dithered for a moment, but finally lowered himself to the glowing bed. Then he sat up. Do I need to take this off? He unzipped Reggie's jacket. Quinn pressed him back into the pod. No, this thing is mostly diagnostic, and cloth doesn't get in the way. Let it do its thing. When he dropped to the bed, she closed the translucent dome and pressed the start button. As soon as the device started humming, Tony cleared his throat. What do you think? Drugs? I'd bet contraband of some kind. Dean, as her lips pressed tight. Despite her distaste for the ensign, she wouldn't start rumors about him without some evidence. Shifty, Tony asked. That's a good word for him. Also an insubordinate, passive-aggressive backstabber. So much for not starting rumors. She backtracked, in my opinion, but I've only known him a few weeks. I've barely met the guy, and I'd call him worse than that. Tony rubbed the back of his neck, pacing 3 steps to the other side of the small room. Heck of a start to my first month on the job. Was he worried about making waves? He was new to StratCom, but his record said he'd been in Space Force for a couple of years. Maybe Systems Command was easier to navigate. The service was full of shifty characters, at all ranks. Even after 4 years at the Academy, Quinn's first year had been stressful, walking on eggshells in every new situation, constantly second-guessing whether this senior officer was one of the rule followers or rule benders. Each new assignment forced you to start over, evaluating who to trust and who to avoid. It was easier to trust no one, but something made her want to trust Tony. She hoped he felt the same about her. I can leave your name out of any report I make. He swung around, his hand dropping to his side. His mouth opened and closed. He took a deep breath, and his face went blank. Not a problem, I'm just. You're new here and don't want to make waves. I get it. You're new here too. She nodded. But if any reports have to be made, I'm the one who will have to do it. Adrian is my responsibility. There's no reason for you to be involved. He started to say something, but she raised a hand. One-time only offer. For a fellow newbie. Tony gazed at her for a moment longer, then gave a single nod. Thanks. I owe you. And I know how you can repay me. Fancy a trip to Ramara City? He groaned, but she heard laughter beneath the sound. You want me to help you babysit a herd of cadets? I'm on my own with 10 kids who haven't been out of the academy in 2 years. I need all the help I can get. And I think the official term is trouble, not herd. A trouble of cadets. He grinned in agreement. Sounds dangerous. Then his smile dimmed. What are you going to do about? The med pod pinged, and the lid popped open. Tony lifted it to full height and stepped back. Tenlo sat up, rubbing a hand over his face and the back of his head. He winced as he encountered the injury. Quinn leaned over the control panel. No concussion. It gave you a painkiller and some prophylactic meds to prevent infection. She peered at the back of his head and sealed up the abrasion. You should go home and clean up. Can you be ready by 8? Tenlos looked at his comm tab. Yeah, I can do that. Don't spend too much time on your hair. Quinn smirked, and be careful when you're combing the back. She tapped a few commands on the panel, then shut the machine down. Your medical record is updated, but nothing was flagged, so no one will know about this. Unless we report it, we can imply it was a random mugging. Tenlos shook his head hard, then winced. No, I don't want anyone else to know. What are you going to tell Dean? Tony asked as they exited the building. Tenlos's face went pale. I don't know. Quinn met Tony's gaze behind Tenlos's back. She frowned. We've got time to figure that out. In the meantime, I'll drop you at the parking lot. Get cleaned up and back here by 8.
Tony loitered in the shade of the tall, oval trees by the VOQ's back entrance, waiting for Tenlos. He pulled a ball cap on, shading his eyes. A couple other cadets had exited the building, strolling past him without notice. Several of them looked worse for wear. Tenlos hadn't been the only cadet who partied too hard last night. Quinn appeared by his side, almost as stealthy as a trained agent. He faked a jump of surprise and turned to her. Why? She laughed, and a wash of warmth rolled through him. He liked this woman. She was smart, funny, compassionate. But she was married, and he was a Commonwealth agent, so he would push those feelings down. They could be friends. Casual work buddies. Even that would be better than being alone all of the time. Nice outfit. Did you look up tourist in the EL Beam catalog? That surprised a laugh out of him. You don't like it? He looked down at his plaid shirt, khaki shorts, and black socks. The sandals really sell it. He grinned. This is the height of Loonscan fashion. And don't knock it. It's comfortable. Give me the 5-second mission briefing. What's the plan for the day? She pointed across the parking lot at the dark blue SFS van. The cadets clustered together, eating, drinking, and laughing, most of the effects of their hangovers forgotten. Coffee and donuts, then we head out. It's about an hour to the capital city. We'll do the usual sightseeing thing in the morning, eat lunch, then free time. Round up the stragglers about 5 and stop for fast food on the way home. Fun and healthy. Tony touched Quinn's arm as she started to move away. What about Adrian and Dion? Quinn let out an exasperated breath. Believe me, if there was a way I could pin his attack on Dion, I would. But it's going to take more than a cadet claiming he was set up. Dion isn't just a jerk. His father is pretty high up the chain. That's one of the reasons he gets away with his insubordination. We'd need gold-plated, steel-reinforced, diamond-studded proof of criminal behavior to make anything stick. And even then, Tony's stomach sank. In the Commonwealth, rule of law was respected, and officers were held to a high standard. Nepotism might get you a good job, but only the most corrupt would attempt a cover-up. In the Federation, corruption seemed to be the norm. One of the many reasons he'd taken this job. No one should have to live that way. He hoped his tiny contribution would one day help rectify this system. What happens if it was a random mugging? And Dean's contact didn't get his package. He'll go after the kid. Quinn's shoulders hunched. I guess we keep watch and hope it doesn't go down that way. I can send Tenlos home. We can make it look like a medical issue, or family emergency. That won't be held against him. You know how to do that? Quinn's shoulders twitched. I can probably figure it out. She started across the parking lot. Let's get moving. Tony hurried to catch up. Do you mind if I take my own car? I'll follow you. He grinned at her narrow-eyed glare and lifted a hand in pledge. I promise I won't desert you, but I have an errand to run after. Fine, but I'm sending 3 of the cadets with you, just to be sure. The morning in Ramara City went according to plan. Tony followed the SFS van into the metropolis. Quinn pulled through the Ramara base gate and spoke to the guard. When it was his turn, the guard waved Tony through without checking any identification. They parked at SFS headquarters and toured the facility, then moved on to the seat of government in the grandiose building next door. After an institutional meal in the headquarters cafeteria, they drove downtown and the cadets paired off to explore the city. Tony watched the last of them disappear, then turned to Quinn. You been here before? Sure, my first assignment was here. You? Tony shook his head. I flew through here when I arrived on planet, of course, but didn't spend any time in town. You want to show a stranger around? He put his elbow out, as if to escort her. She didn't take his arm. Don't you have an errand to run? He smirked. Not until later. After you all head back to Florence. For now, I am here to see the city with a pretty lady. A nervous smile flashed across her face and disappeared. Sure, the Riverwalk is the best place to start. She pulled her sweater closer, as if for comfort. Tony made a mental note not to flirt with Quinn anymore. It clearly made her uncomfortable. They strolled along the warm, faux cobbled stone sidewalks of the capital city. Buildings that looked freshly painted stood on one side, with exquisitely pruned topiary on the other, separating the sidewalk from the river. Picturesque bridges crossed the broad waterway at regular intervals. A perfectly engineered, charming, and livable city. Tourists wandered nearby, easily distinguished from the locals by their bright shorts, sandals, and cheerful dispositions. From time to time, they encountered a few of the cadets exploring the same tourist destinations. Quinn nodded and greeted them all, but made it clear she had no interest in detaining them. The students smiled gratefully and angled away, diving into bookstores, cafes, and bars along the street, as if escaping. As the sun moved toward the west, They sat at a small outdoor bar along the riverfront, sharing some pretzels and beer. Half of the cadets had gathered at a nearby table, talking and laughing. As they watched a few more wander in, Tony's gaze strayed to the darkening streets. "I haven't seen Adrian since we split up after lunch." Quinn's head snapped around, focusing on the cadets. She counted under her breath and swore softly. "He's missing." She strode across the bar and stopped by the rowdy group, knocking hard on the closest table. The chatter cut off immediately, and the cadets turned to face her. "Where's Cadet Tenlos?" The kids looked at each other, and most of them shrugged. Quinn frowned. "Who was he with?" "We paired up for a reason." Her glare went from face to face. A pretty girl with curly blonde hair raised a timid hand. "He was with me." "Then we met up with Ferretti and Tinsel." She pointed at two other girls and frowned. "I thought he was with us?" Quinn moved closer to the trio. "When was the last time you saw him?" Tony edged nearer to hear Tinsel's soft response. "He was with us when we left John Tours." The girl pointed down a side street. "He must have wandered off before we got here. It's only a few blocks." The third girl pushed between the other two. "It's not our job to babysit anyone. It's not our fault he wandered away." "Did I blame anyone?" Quinn looked the girl over. She wore expensive clothing and a supercilious expression. Quinn wrinkled her nose. "But it is your responsibility to have your team's back. Haven't you learned that yet? That includes making sure everyone gets to the RV." She stabbed a finger at the ground. The girl looked bored. "RV? Rendezvous. Where the troops meet up during a mission. You should have learned that first year." "You make it sound like we're in combat or something." The girl rolled her eyes at her friends. Quinn stepped closer, forcing the girl to look up at her. "What exactly do you think the Federation Space Force does? We're soldiers. All of those training sessions at school are to prepare you for combat. If you can't even keep track of your comrades during a sightseeing trip, how can you be trusted to guard their backs in wartime?" Ferretti stepped back, pushing the curly blonde forward. "He wasn't my partner. If you're going to yell at someone, it should be Luciana. I was paired with Tinsel." She made it to the RV. Luciana went as white as a sheet, visibly trembling. Quinn looked past her, still staring down Ferretti. "The loyalty and team spirit here is heartwarming. I'll be sure to make a note of it in my report." She turned away as Ferretti spluttered like a fish out of water. "Erickson, Norwood." Two boys stepped forward when she snapped out their names. "You two and Luciana are responsible for getting the rest of the team back to StratCom." She tossed the keys toward the two, and the taller one caught them. "Keep in mind that's a government vehicle, which means its speed is capped, and it is heavily monitored at all times." She looked at her comm tab. "I will check the logs when I return. I expect everyone to have clocked in to the VOQ by 7:30. That gives you 40 minutes for dinner on the return trip." Her gaze traveled over the group, pausing for a long moment on Ferretti. "If anyone causes any problems, I will report you to the superintendent and send you home early. Is that clear?" The whole group snapped to attention and chorused, "Yes, sir." "Go." She grabbed Luciana's arm as the cadets hurried away. "Send me your tracker data. I want to see where you went from the time you left us after lunch." The blonde's face flared red, then went even paler than before. Ah." She sent a desperate look over her shoulder at Ferretti's retreating back. "Let me guess, you went somewhere you weren't supposed to." And Ferretti said no one would ever know. Luciana jawed silently for a moment. Quinn made a gimme motion with her fingers. "I'm granting you immunity." The girl hesitated for a second, then swiped her comm tab open and tapped a few buttons. "Please don't tell her where you got this," she whispered. Quinn's device vibrated in response. "I'm making no promises." She checked the screen, then nodded, pointing at the retreating cadets' backs. "You don't want to get left behind." Luciana bolted. Quinn turned to Tony. "Thanks for keeping me company today. Looks like I've got a bit of walkabout to do. I'll see you later." He grabbed her arm. "Why don't you let me look for him? You can go back with the kids. Surely it's not a good idea to leave them on their own." "I can't ask that of you." She rubbed her forehead. "Norwood's the son of a friend, and his buddy Erickson is one of the most straight arrow kids I've ever met. Plus Luciana is scared to cross me now. They'll get home fine." But how will you and Adrian get back to Florence? There's a regular train, and I can have Reggie pick us up at the station. She didn't look excited at the prospect. The base was only 10 clicks from the city, but based on his single interaction with Quinn's husband. Tony wasn't surprised by the reaction. He'd be the type to complain about any change to his routine. I'm not going to let you search for him alone. Tony put out a hand. Let me see where we're going. Quinn held the device out of reach. You have things to do. And I'm quite capable of taking care of myself and an errant cadet. Tony propped his fists on his hips and looked her over. I'm sure you can handle anything. But Adrian has already had one run-in with violence. You know, going into a potentially hostile situation without backup is foolhardy. If nothing else, I can save Reggie a trip into town. What about your errand? It can wait. I'm not going to let you get bludgeoned by a drug dealer just because I had to pick up my dry cleaning. Dry cleaning? Quinn consulted her comm tab, her mind clearly not on the question. What's that? Tony mentally cursed the slip. They called it auto-lave here in the Federation. Such a tiny mistake, but it could get him sent to prison as a spy. And he already messed up with the mom thing. It's an old joke on Lunesco. It means anything mundane and unimportant. Where are we headed? She showed him a map on her screen. They were at John Tours about 30 minutes ago. But they weren't there long. It looks like they literally walked in and back out again. Maybe they realized they'd be late if they didn't hustle. Or maybe they dropped in so they could claim that was their last location if anyone asked. She pointed at herself. Before that, they were at O'Halloran's. I think it's a bar, definitely outside the AO. At his raised brow, she clarified, area of operations. We had a mission briefing yesterday afternoon, and I laid out the rules of engagement including where they were allowed to go. She tapped her device again. And a dotted line appeared around the tourist area of town, with O'Halloran's very definitely outside the green. I knew what it meant. I just like to hear you talk the military lingo. The words popped out before he could stop them, the tone way too flirty. Luckily, she didn't seem to notice. Let's swing by John Tours in case Tinsel was right, and he got left behind there. I don't want to hustle all the way to O'Halloran's only to find out he met a pretty girl down the street. She started toward the narrow alley. He doesn't strike me as a ladies' man, but that seems like a smart move. Tony paused at the entrance to the lane. With the sun low in the sky, deep shadows filled the alley. Are you sure this is still in the AO? It looks kind of sketch. As if to preempt his comment, lamps popped on, filling the narrow pedestrian street with brilliant light. Strings of bulbs crisscrossed the alley, providing a romantic ambience. Faux candles flickered to life on little tables. Waiters took orders from beautiful people in trendy clothing. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked, people laughed. Kinda upscale for our kids. Quinn laughed at his self-correction. Did you see Ferrati's clothes? I'm not sure this place is upscale enough for her. I wonder why she's at the academy. Tony could guess. Her parents wanted their spoiled daughter to learn discipline. Or they thought it would be a good start to a political career. Or they were highly placed in the chain of command and could protect her. All three scenarios were common in the Federation. Was Quinn so idealistic she didn't recognize that? They walked through John Tours' cocktail emporium, scanning the tables, but didn't see Adrian Tenlos. Quinn showed a picture to the bartender. The man recognized the girls but claimed he hadn't seen the young man. Thanks. Quinn bit her lip as she turned and headed out of the bar. So they lied about him being with them at this point. Or that guy only pays attention to women. Tony fidgeted with his comm tab. Going against all his training, he'd placed a tracker on Tenlos's device that morning. He knew exactly where the boy was. But if he told Quinn, she'd want to know where he got the tech and why he'd done it. He couldn't answer either of those questions. He was supposed to be in deep cover, living as a local, drawing no attention to himself. Even having the program on his comm tab was a huge risk. But he suspected Adrian had stumbled into a drug ring, and he knew he'd never forgive himself if something happened to the boy that he could have prevented. So he'd downloaded the code from his private digital cache and loaded it on the boy's comm tab. Currently, Adrian was at O'Halloran's, but it looked like he might be in a non-public area. He'd either have to ditch Quinn somewhere along the way or devise a way to lead her to him without her suspecting. Why don't you stay here and question a few of the patrons? Maybe that female bartender will remember him. He put a hand on Quinn's shoulder and turned her toward the bar. "I'll head over to O'Halloran's. Divide and conquer." Quinn scowled. "It will take me 10 seconds to talk to that bartender, and then we can go together. If it weren't ridiculous, I'd think you were trying to ditch me." He laughed, hoping it didn't sound too phony, and followed her across the room to the bartender. He should have retrieved Tenlo's on his own while Quinn searched, or better yet, left her to find the kid herself. But his conscience wouldn't let him do that. He was turning out to be a lousy spy. As expected, the bartender had no memory of Adrian. They found the subway and took the red line to the stop closest to O'Halloran's. This part of town left a lot to be desired. Graffiti covered the walls of the escalators that took them to the surface, and Tony refused to touch the sticky-looking handrail. The other passengers exiting the station looked worn, downtrodden, tired. None of them so much as glanced at him and Quinn. "We kind of stand out here." Tony pulled his shirt tail from his slacks in an attempt to fit in better. It was marginally successful. Imagine how the kids looked. Clean cut, wearing expensive clothing. Quinn leaned closer as they stepped off the escalator at the top. It's a wonder they weren't mugged. The street matched the subway station. Unlike the tourist sections of Ramara City, trash rustled along the curb and eddied in some of the doorways. Although sunset was still an hour away, the tall buildings blocked most of the natural light, and the streetlights appeared to be inoperable. It's probably not as bad in bright daylight. Tony moved to walk between Quinn and the buildings, not trusting anyone who might exit these dreary businesses. But why did they come here? He pulled his ComTab from his pocket. Holding it by his side where Quinn couldn't see it, he checked Tenlo's location. Still at O'Halloran's, but in a back room. He'd bet his career the kid wouldn't be visible from the main bar. He snorted a little. He was literally betting his entire career. If he lost, he'd end up in prison. If he won, he wasn't likely to net anything. A smart spy would cut his losses and walk away. Apparently, he was both a bad spy and a stupid one. Quinn nodded at the small sign over an unlit doorway. Their destination. Tony held up a hand. "Let me go in first." "Are you armed?" Quinn raised a small stunner. "Where? Why? How?" She chuckled. "I'm a military officer. We carry sidearms when we're out of the garrison, even when we're escorting cadets on a sightseeing tour." She slid the small weapon back into her sweater pocket. That explained the cardigan. "I don't suppose you have another one of those hidden in there? I was wondering why you were wearing a sweater in this weather." She shook her head. "Nope, just the one. Do you know how to use one? I didn't think civilians got weapons training." "I'm from UNESCO, remember? All kinds of varmints out in the fringe." He frowned. "How'd you get into the Capitol with that?" She pointed her free hand at herself. "Officer, remember? They expect me to carry. It's on my ID." Tony filed that information away for later. The Federation was a strange place. Quinn opened the door, one hand still in her pocket, and led the way down 3 steps to a dark bar. Their shoes stuck to the floor, making a distinctive ripping noise with each step. Every head turned toward them, then several people disappeared down a dark hallway. Ignoring the shifting, nervous clientele, Quinn crossed to the bar, extending her ComTab. "I'm looking for a young friend of mine." The barkeep wiped a glass with his dirty rag as he gazed at the screen. After a long look, he shook his head. "Nope, ain't seen him." "Are you sure?" Quinn shook the device a little to get his attention. "He said he was coming here, and when he didn't show up at our meeting." The man put the glass down and leaned across the bar. "I said I ain't seen him." "Do you mind if I ask around?" Quinn smiled. "Maybe he came in while you were on break." The man's eyes roved over her, then came back to her face. "Knock yourself out, sweetheart. But don't be surprised if no one wants to talk to you. We don't like cops much in here." Quinn's eyes went wide. "Cops? I'm not a cop." She leaned in conspiratorially. "He's not very bright. Probably wandered in and got distracted by She broke off, clearly searching for something in the room he could have been distracted by. "A pretty girl," Tony said. "Were there any pretty girls in here?" The barman's gaze came to Tony, flicking quickly over his carefully boring clothing and Boy Scout haircut. "Martha, there's a pretty girl." He jerked his chin at an old woman curled around a half-empty mug of beer. Quinn lifted a placating hand. Yes, very pretty, but I was thinking younger. He's only 20. A little smirk crossed the man's face and faded. Then he shrugged. Couple girls came in this afternoon. Your boy probably followed him out, if he was here. But I didn't see him. Quinn thanked the man and turned to survey the customers. Mind if I use the facilities? Tony asked. For paying customers only. The man's eyes challenged him. I'll have a beer. He put some cash on the bar. Keep the change. Leaning close to Quinn, he lowered his voice. I'm going to check the back. Quinn frowned, then glanced at her hand still in the pocket. Want me to come? With a quick shake of his head, he headed toward the dark hall. Back in a minute. He hated to leave Quinn alone out there, but she could protect herself. He hoped. The lurkers had deserted the hall, and when he opened the door marked toilet, no one hid inside. That meant there was a back room or exit, but Tenlos's tracker showed him here, right in this tiny space, which meant he must be upstairs or down. Tony hoped it was up. He hated basements. Too few escape options. Leaving the toilet, he headed away from the taproom down the dark corridor. At the end, stairs led up to the left. He slipped off his sandals, tucking them into the pockets of his cargo shorts as he ghosted up, staying close to the wall. At the top, a man snoozed on a stool in front of a closed door. Tony got him in a headlock and choked him out before he realized what was happening. He eased the body to the floor, tied his hands with the zip tie he always hid in his cap, and shoved a corner of the man's shirt into his mouth. He opened the door a crack. Did you give my package to? A voice Tony was pretty sure belonged to Dion spoke softly, gently even, punctuated by the slap of something. Maybe a fist in a palm. Tenlos's voice cracked. I didn't give it to anyone. Someone hit me and took it. And you didn't think to fight back? Now the tone was condescending and cold. Some help you were. I was expecting a friend, not an attack. Tony silently cheered Tenlos's surprising bravery while he debated his options. He listened intently. Unless someone was unnaturally still, there were 3 people in the room. Tenlos, Dion, and a third person who hadn't spoken. Another captive or an accomplice. Tony would bet on the latter. He pushed the door a little wider and peered through the crack. Booted feet, tied together, came into view, and jeans-clad legs, skinny and shaking. Tenlos. Beyond him, a large man who looked strangely familiar lounged against a desk, scrolling through his comm tab. He looked relaxed, calm, and extremely dangerous. Tony wished he'd brought some weapons, but his Federation cover didn't allow him to have any. And that was the key. He couldn't stage a rescue because his cover would be blown. He needed a diversion that would allow Tenlos to escape on his own. Should he blunder in as if by mistake? Tion probably wouldn't recognize him, but the big man could undoubtedly take him out. He could ring a fire alarm. But he wasn't sure this building would have one. He could set a fire in the bathroom, but he didn't want to injure anyone. As he crouched outside the door, evaluating the least risky responses, the guy looked up and recognition clicked. This was Andrei Van Lorkov, head of the Police drug cartel. He'd seen a mock-up of the guy on the news last week. The police had been looking for help locating him. With a silent apology to Tenlos for abandoning him, Tony eased the door closed and tiptoed back down the stairs, dialing the tip line on his comm tab. Federation tip line. Name, please. Tony paused at the bottom of the steps. I thought this was supposed to be anonymous. A dry laugh turned into a cough. This is the Federation. Name, please. Was that an acknowledgement that the Federation didn't allow anonymity, or just tired repetition? He threw out a random name. Charles Anthony. Your ComTab locator chip isn't reporting properly, Mr. Anthony. I accidentally dropped it in a toilet this morning. I'm lucky it's functioning at all. Can I give you my tip, please? I just saw Andrei Van Lorkov threatening a boy. Van Lorkov? The voice seemed more interested now. What's your location? Tony gave the name of the bar and street. They're upstairs. Stairway at the end of the back hall. Van Lorkov has an accomplice with him. A whistle of surprise shrilled against Tony's ear, and he clamped a hand over the speaker, casting a nervous look over his shoulder. The door at the top of the steps remained firmly shut. When he turned back, Quinn stood before him. He jumped back in unfeigned alarm. "You are stealthy." She grinned. "When you have a toddler who hates to nap, you learn to move quietly." The smile disappeared. "Any sign of Adrian?" Tony grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door at the end of the hall. If his map was correct, it led to an alley. "Yes, but you can't go up there." She pulled her arm out of his grip. "Why not?" She tried to push past him, but he slapped his hand against the wall, blocking her with his arm. "Ensign Dion has a friend." "Dion is up there. What the heck? Why would he bring a cadet to a seedy?" She broke off, checking over her shoulder. "This is not somewhere a cadet, or an officer for that matter, should frequent." When she tried to duck under his arm, he caught her hand. "No, do not go up there. The police are on their way. We need to get out." "Police?" Her brows came down. "Is Adrian in trouble?" "Yes, but us blundering up there." Even with that, he nodded at the stunner in her hand. "If you want all three of us to be dead, then by all means pay them a visit." "Dead? You said the authorities are coming." She pointed at his comm tab. "Is that who's on the comm?" Shit, he'd forgotten they were there. Quinn threw him completely off balance. "Yes, the authorities. But—" "Mr. Anthony." The tiny voice called shrilly through the cheap speaker. Tony slapped the device to his ear. "I'm here." "Mr. Anthony?" Quinn asked. He shook his head, herding her toward the rear door with his body. "Are you coming?" The voice confirmed units had been dispatched. "Is Ven Lorkov aware of your presence?" "Heck no," Tony said, letting his voice tremble a bit. "I don't want to be targeted by a drug lord." Quinn's eyes went wide, then her gaze darted back to the stairs. "No," he mouthed the word at her. Wrapping his free arm around her shoulders, he used a hip to boost the rear door open and pushed her through. As they stumbled into the smelly, unlit alley, he sensed rather than saw shadowy figures lurking in the darkness. He raised his voice. "Thank you, officer. We're clear of the building." "Is that your squad car?" The alley emptied even faster than Tony expected. "We don't have an officer in the area yet, but they are en route." Tony kept the device pressed tight to his head, hoping no one else would overhear the words. "That might not have been such a good idea," Quinn whispered. "What if one of those guys tips off the wah?" The door burst open. Quinn leapt back with a strangled squawk. The huge form of Ven Lorkov appeared in the alley, square head swinging left and right. His features were impossible to see in the narrow, dank passage, but anger rolled off him in waves. Tony shoved Quinn behind a dumpster and crouched beside her, something sharp biting into his unshod foot. He hit the call end button on his comm tab, dousing the faint light. Dion blundered out behind the criminal. Light from the dim hallway seemed bright in the alley. The ensign held Tenlos's arm. He must have cut the ankle restraints because the boy appeared to be mobile. "Get the car." Ven Lorkov's growl sent a shiver of fear up Tony's spine. Sure, he was an undercover agent, but this man was a cold-blooded killer. Dion appeared to be equally terrified. He dropped Tenlos's arm and lunged away from the door. "Stay here." Tony peeled the stunner from Quinn's grip and pushed her deeper into the stinking gap between the dumpster and the wall. Without the comm tab lit, she was invisible. He waited until Dion passed their hiding place, then slid up beside him, pressing the stunner against his neck. "Don't make a sound." With a tiny sizzle, the stunner took out Dion's nervous system, and the ensign crumbled to the ground. Tony managed to catch him before he hit, easing him to the filthy pavement. Sirens wailed in the distance. Tony hoped they were coming this way, but he wasn't going to bet on it. He padded back toward the bar, keeping low in hopes the large man holding his friend captive wouldn't notice. The sirens grew louder. Tony used the sound to cover his footsteps, increasing his speed. He ran past the dumpster sheltering Quinn and launched himself at the bulky drug lord. The man grunted at the impact, but seemed to absorb it, like a mountain absorbing the impact of a small rock. Tony pressed the stunner against the man's thick neck and pressed the trigger. Nothing happened. Well, not nothing. Ven Lorkov's massive hands clamped around Tony's arms, his fingers biting into his flesh. Tony suppressed the shiver of terror and focused on the stunner. The faint glow from the tiny screen illuminated the underside of the giant's chin and his scruffy beard. It also glinted on the neck of his armored shirt. Tony pushed the stunner a little higher, under the thug's ear, and fired again. The drug lord went down. Tony managed to wrench himself free before he got squashed like a bug beneath the man's massive form. A strangled sob behind him reminded him of the cadet. A witness. 2 witnesses, actually. Quinn still huddled in the corner behind the dumpster. She wouldn't have been able to see what went down, but she'd know Tony Bergen had taken out a drug lord. That was not the kind of publicity a deep operative needed. But what could he do? Stun them both and claim he wasn't here? Neither of them would believe that, and if they chose to push it, that would bring him more notice. He stumbled away from the criminal, lurching against Quinn's dumpster, staring at the stunner. He knew Tenlos couldn't see him in the dark, but the actions would lend credibility to his voice. He hoped. I can't believe that worked. The tremor and faint crack on the last word should have netted him an acting award. Tony? Tenlos's voice sounded much more terrified than his. Maybe his acting wasn't as impressive as he thought. He activated his ComTab light, shining it on the thug. He didn't try to suppress the very real adrenaline shake of his hand. Tony? Adrian. Quinn's head appeared above the lip of the dumpster. Are you okay? I'm okay, I think. Adrian? Tony focused the light on the kid. He swallowed hard and nodded. He didn't have a chance to. He broke off, swallowing again. I think we should. Tony made a shooing motion. Leave? Don't we have to make a statement? Quinn gazed at the large lump that was Van Lorkov. He's a wanted man. Tony nudged the criminal with a toe, then turned to look at Adrian. If we want charges to be filed against Dean, Adrian probably needs to talk to the authorities. He bit his lip, then handed the stunner to Quinn. I really don't need to be associated with any of this. Quinn frowned. Meaning what? You don't want to give a statement? Not really. He lifted his hands in supplication. I'm new at StratCom, still on probation. I don't need a reason for anyone to. Let's call it scrutinize my activities. Civilians have probation? Tenlos turned so Quinn could cut the plastic restraints. They didn't, but the cadet didn't know that. They watch us pretty closely the first 90 days, or so I'm told. Quinn gave him a funny look, but didn't contradict the statement. You want us to leave you out of the report altogether? He watched her carefully in the faint glow of his ComTab. You could say a stranger helped? I really need to. Under her intense gaze, he couldn't come up with a decent excuse. The sirens came closer. She sucked in a breath. I forgot you had an appointment. Go. Adrian and I will catch the train home. We'll tell the officers that a helpful bystander assisted us. Thanks. I'll see you at the base. Tony darted down the alley away from the wailing klaxons, barely escaping the narrow lane before the first car skidded to a halt. From the shadows of a doorway across the street, he watched them remove the now groggy Van Lurkov and Dean. Then escort Quinn and Tenlos to a waiting squad car. He hoped they wouldn't be detained too long. For some reason, he had no fear either of them would mention him.
Quinn strolled into the officers' club, Ensign Kirchhoff at her side. She'd tried to ditch him before they got here, but he'd been hanging on her every word since the news broke on Monday morning. Quinn. Over here. People who'd barely spoken to her in the past suddenly wanted her attention. She smiled and waved but headed to the bar. I got you a beer. Tony slid the bottle down the counter before she could tell the bartender what she wanted. She caught it, noting it was the same brand she'd drunk at the bar on the Riverwalk in Romara City. She raised it in toast, then jerked her head toward the tall windows beyond the bar. It's nice out. Tony followed her through the gauntlet of her new fans. Saw you on the news. Let's get coffee so you can tell me all about it. That was amazing. Are you a special investigator? Capturing a drug lord? Great performance report fodder. She fended them off without committing to anything. They stepped through the open windows onto a sparsely occupied patio overlooking a golf course. The faint whiff of fish and salt still struck her every time she left a building. So much of her career had been spent in the sanitized air of a ship or station. Even after several months here, the smells surprised her. Tony put his beer on a table near the edge of the pavement and pulled out a chair for her. I guess Space Force officers don't like to be outside? He nodded at the elderly couple on the far side of the patio, their only companions. She laughed. I think some of them are agoraphobic, but most of them don't want to walk that far to get a drink. Even for the opportunity to talk to the hero of the day? He tipped his bottle at her. I'm sure Reggie will get a slew of dinner invites from those who really want to know. The rest are content to claim they know me, without actually having to spend time with me. Tony frowned. Why wouldn't they want to spend time with you? I'm a woman. A married woman with a kid. Most of those guys think women are. She broke off, pressing her lips together. The Space Force is still very behind the times when it comes to equality. That's one of the reasons I'm leaving. Tony sat up straighter. Leaving Florence? No, the service. She turned the bottle in place, a few degrees at a time. Not right away. I have 6 months left on my current commitment, and Reggie will be assigned here for at least 2 more years after that. So, I'll be around. She sighed. It's not as much fun as it used to be, and I have a child I see only a few hours a week. Time to do the mom thing. I respect that, he said. They sat in silence for a while. The chink of the bottle against the metal table brought her out of her reverie, and she tried to smile at Tony. Sorry, I'm not very good company today. He waved it away. Not a problem. You don't have to be cheerful for me. But I do have a question, if you don't mind. Sure, what's up? He gave her a hard look. What's up? You just busted a drug dealer single-handedly, and you can't guess what my question is. She laughed. Oh, that. Yeah, that. What happened after he paused to make sure they were still alone? After that helpful bystander left. Mr. Charles Anthony? She smirked at his jerk of shock. Don't look so surprised. He gave his name to the emergency operator. Did you think it wouldn't become common knowledge? I'm surprised it was released. Mr. Anthony might be uncomfortable with public attention. Tony's desire to stay in the background puzzled her. Helping to apprehend a criminal wouldn't damage his career in the FSF. In fact, it might help him climb the ladder faster. She'd seen service members parlay much less into promotions and prize assignments. Is that what it is? Mr. Anthony is shy? His eyes twinkled at the teasing tone. I don't know Mr. Anthony, so I can only guess. Maybe his mother would be worried if she heard of his dangerous activities. He downed the rest of his beer. Or maybe he's trying to stay under the radar for personal reasons. Did Tony have a bad relationship with his family, and was worried the attention would bring on conflict? She hadn't considered that possibility. I'm so used to attention seekers, it never occurred to me someone might not want their face in the news. Don't worry, Mr. Anthony's name wasn't shared with the press. She paused to take a drink. And? Tony prompted when she didn't continue. She set the bottle down with a grin. And nothing. They asked me and Adrian what happened. Adrian told them about Dion and the delivery turned attack. About how Faraday had suggested they visit this bar. She'd heard from a friend that it was trending. That Dion met him there and wouldn't let him leave when the others moved on. I suspect Faraday will be investigated and let off. Her family is too wealthy, and Dion made sure she had plausible deniability. What happens to Dion? She played with the bottle again, then put her hands in her lap. He'll be separated involuntarily. If he's convicted, that will convert to a dishonorable discharge. If he gets let off, he can petition to be recommissioned, but that rarely happens. The FSF doesn't like bad publicity. What was it you said to Ferretti? So much for loyalty and team spirit. No wonder cadets look out for themselves when that's the example the service sets. We cut loose anyone accused of not following the rules. Quinn leaned forward. Don't say that. That's not what the Federation is about. He locked eyes with her. Isn't it? If it's standard procedure when an officer is arrested, what's to stop someone from getting a rival arrested on trumped-up charges just to get rid of them? Because we don't operate that way. FSF officers have integrity. How dare he talk about her service this way? There are some bad eggs, sure, there are everywhere. But most FSF officers are good people. I guess I shouldn't expect a civilian to understand. Tony lifted both hands. Sorry, you're right. I wasn't trying to slander anyone. I'm just glad you got back safely, both of you. I assume the Academy won't hold this against Adrian? She smiled. No. In fact, he's going home a hero. Caught a bad guy. Rescued a senior officer. She pointed at herself, then shrugged. I figured since I'm getting out, I should let him take the glory. Plus, I don't need to give the Major another reason to hate me. Dean was his favorite. I'm glad I'm leaving. Tony raised his empty bottle in toast. Here's to going home a hero. She clinked hers against it. Here, here.
This has been Crimson Flicker, a Crimson Empire prequel. If you haven't read the rest of the series, you can find the first book at books2read.com/KE1. But you'll have to pretend you don't know Tony's background when you read the beginning of the book. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and tell your friends about it. Someday we'd like to re-record these with real, human voices, and the more folks we can get listening, the faster that will happen. Thanks for listening.